Well, it's that time of year again where the Seahawks season is just getting started. The Mariners season is likely coming to an inevitable and typical unfortunate early end because while they have great, in fact, some of the best pitching they've ever had in the team's history, they've been spending the entire season flirting with a Mendoza line as a team batting average. But that's a separate issue for a separate time. As far as the Kraken are concerned, we finally are starting to see some hockey as rookie training camp has just started and the real training camp for the rest of the team is right around the corner. And the Kraken themselves have been getting to work as well, not only on the ice with the camps coming up, rookie camp already underway, and like I said, training camp, but also off the ice with Adam Larsson, the big cat, getting paid. Not for this year, that was already taken care of, but he gets a 4-year extension worth $5.25 million per year, which means the Kraken now have their top pairing right shot defenseman locked up for each of the next 4 seasons, and the entire top pair, with Vince Dunn being on the other side of that, locked up for the next 3. And yes, I know Brandon Montour is still their top right shot defenseman, at least by contract if nothing else, but I don't expect that they're going to split up the pair of Larsson and Dunn. The two of them not only complement each other pretty well on the ice, but also get along pretty well off of it. In fact, Vince Dunn actually was the original person to break the news that Larsson had signed this extension, and that turned into a whole thing. Larsson told him to take it down, but it seems like it was all in good fun between the two of them. Obviously, some excitement that they'll still get to be playing together, and regardless, it does mean that the Kraken have the top end of their defensive end locked up for at least the next few years. Though, right off the bat, I do think it's worth mentioning that with that being the case, the number of longer contracts that have been given out this offseason by the Kraken, there are certainly some Kraken fans out there that will say are concerned about this being furthering the trend of the Kraken just more and more locking themselves into mediocrity for years to come. I think there's maybe some fairness to those concerns. Certainly things didn't go very well last year, so that's probably tainting the perspective a little bit. I think if we saw this type of extension come after last season, or 2 seasons ago after the playoff year, we probably wouldn't see nearly as much concern or worry or just... Anyway, the point is, I don't think we'd be seeing quite as many, at least, of these more pessimistic takes about these contracts getting signed if we were coming off of a better season for the Kraken than the certainly more disappointing season that was last year. Even with that being said, there's no way around the fact that this is now the second contract on the defensive end, third in total if you count Chandler Stevenson on the forward end, that is going to take a player into their mid to late 30s by the end of it, which does certainly increase the likelihood that it's not going to age particularly well into those final year or 2. At least as far as that's concerned, this Larsson contract does end 2 years earlier than either the Montour or Stevenson ones do. Even still, I do think it's being a little bit overdramatic to say that this contract, or even the full set of contracts that the Kraken signed this offseason, are going to lock them into any kind of long-term mediocrity. For one thing, they only have 8 contracts on the roster that go past the next 2 seasons, and only the 4 big ones signed this offseason that go past the next 3. And one of those, the Matty Beniers one, is to a younger player that should just be getting better year over year through pretty much the entirety of that contract as he comes into his prime. And sure, the other 3 might age poorly, but again, even just the 8 spots still leaves quite a bit of roster space and cap room to fill in the remainder of the spots. And sure, some of, if not hopefully a decent chunk of that cap space and roster space that's going to clear up over the next 3 seasons will likely go to some extensions the Kraken will want to sign, assuming players play well enough in the time it takes them to get those extensions. The fastest one coming up being Riker Evans coming off the end of his rookie deal at the end of this next season. But then really the next big extensions the Kraken are going to have to sign to guys currently on the roster are all 3 years away. Shane Wright still has 3 years left of his entry-level contract, and you'll also have Vince Dunn, Jared McCann, and if he can stay healthy, Andrei Burakovsky. I suppose between those 2 years, after 2 seasons, they will have Oliver Bjorkstrand and Ellie Tolvanen, among others, coming up, so it's not like there aren't some other contracts in there, but anyway, it's probably not going to be until that 3-year from now mark that we see some bigger extensions get handed out again, at least to guys currently on the roster, when Dunn, McCann, and potentially Shane Wright all come up at the same time. Anyway, all that is to say that although we have been seeing a lot of money and a lot of term being handed out by the Kraken this offseason, certainly more than we've been used to seeing up to this point, it still leaves plenty of space for the Kraken to make moves, whether it's Ron Francis if things go well this season, or potentially someone else at the helm if things do not go particularly well over the next season or two, it's not going to lock the Kraken into any kind of long-term, this is the roster that we have for the foreseeable future. There's still plenty of contracts coming up in the next few seasons, and although this does lock in the top 3 defensemen for the next few years, personally, I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing for, at least until the end of that done contract. And to bring it all back to Adam Larsson, the whole reason we're doing this video in the first place, well, maybe I could potentially see an argument for it being a little bit more prudent to wait to extend a 31-year-old player until at least partway through his season to see how things are going and see if he is starting to slow down. I don't really think that Larsson has given any reason for the Kraken not to believe that he's going to continue to be the player that we've seen for the last few seasons. For one, it's not like speed is really a key part of his game. And for another, well, with older players, you start to think a little bit more about injury issues. And I do realize I'm calling a 31-year-old guy an older player while I'm older than that. So that's a whole separate issue that I'll just have to deal with myself. But the point is, Larsson has never really had injury issues, at least not with the Kraken anyway, where he has played every single game that the Kraken have played as a team, save for one, which he missed for the birth of his child. So I think that's fairly understandable. The point is, he has been an absolute rock on that first pair for the Kraken since they took the ice for the first time. And not only has he played a lot of games, he has played a lot of those games, consistently being a team leader in time on ice. So at the very least, the Kraken are getting a lot for their money when it comes to amount paid per minute played. And sure, Larsson isn't going to offer a ton directly offensively anyway. We kind of have known that, although with it being said, he has had his best offensive seasons in Seattle, so take that for what it's worth. But just the fact that he is as good and responsible as he is defensively allows a defensive partner who's more offensively minded, in Vince Dunn, for example, to be a little bit more offensive and take a little bit more risk. Now, sometimes that does end up biting Dunn coming back the other way, but either way, Larsson's presence defensively certainly helps balance that top pair and allows Dunn to play the game that he does. And defensively, Larsson has been, even last season when things weren't going as well for the team, one of the best defensive defensemen in the league. He was in the 97th percentile in all NHL players in defense as measured by Dom Lucian. So while some might disagree, and even Dom's model for figuring out how much players are worth getting paid does disagree, personally I think that Larsson, at least right now anyway, is worth the just over $5 million that this contract or this extension will give him starting next season. Now, if he still is worth that next season and through the 4 years of the contract, that remains to be seen, and I'll admit I'm a little bit skeptical that this is going to age well into the last 2 years of it. We'll just have to wait and see. At least one other reason to not be too pessimistic about this contract hamstringing the Kraken when it comes to cap space. Again, it's worth remembering that the cap is likely to go up over the next few years fairly significantly, with the one potentially big wrinkle of a looming possible lockout with the CBA coming up. But certainly, as always, I'd love to know what you think down in the comments about this contract, whether you think it's worth it now, if you're more concerned about what the projection of the future looks like, if you are a little bit more of the doom and gloom about this locking the Kraken into long-term mediocrity. And I understand to some I'm going to sound overly optimistic that this isn't locking the Kraken into mediocrity, but believe me, I know when to be pessimistic about things, and the team that plays on the other side of the city in T-Mobile Park has me feeling a little bit more pessimistic for sure. But that's, again, a different issue. But before we close things out, there's one other piece of, at least big enough to be worth mentioning, news that came out of Krakenland here over the last few days, and that is that they released at least the logos for the specialty jerseys for the different themed nights over the course of the year, and I gotta say, as a whole group, I'm a big fan of these jerseys, especially the first one they'll have on October 19th, the Hispanic Heritage Night. That logo set is just fantastic in my opinion. Then we'll have Military Appreciation Night and Hockey Fights Cancer. Those ones are pretty generic, just with the green and purple /pink backgrounds. Indigenous always a great one. I'm also a huge fan of the Green Knight one as well as the Black Hockey History Night one. Both fantastic, but again, as a general group, I really like all of these logos. Yeah, excited to see what those will look like as a full jersey, and although I don't quite have the money to swing bidding for actually trying to get one of the player worn ones, which are the only ones they make as full jerseys, yeah, excited to maybe get some merch for a couple of these different nights over the course of the year. And again, I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comment section about what you think of these different themed nights for this 24-25 season. With that, though, we will finally close things out on this one. There will be plenty of videos coming out here in the next few weeks, certainly more than the much more sparse videos we've had over the course of the summer. It's been a pretty busy summer just with life stuff going on, so videos haven't been nearly as consistent as I would have liked them to be over the course of the summer, but we've got season predictions. I'm still working on getting the 6th episode of the History of Hockey one that I know a lot of people are looking forward to. That will be out before the start of the season. It's had some delays here and there, as well as potentially another R&R, though I might save that, or another... as well as potentially another 101 that, I don't know, maybe I'll save that one for a little bit into the season. We'll see. Plenty of content coming out here in the next few weeks before we finally get into the preseason and then the start of the Kraken season. Until next time, though, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.